What if I told you that America's greatest war hero was rejected by every branch of the military? That the man who would single-handedly stop an entire German army was laughed out of recruiting offices for being too small, too young, too weak? June 1942. A scrawny teenager walks into a US Marine recruiting station. He's barely 5'5", weighs maybe 110 pounds soaking wet. The recruiter doesn't even bother looking up from his paperwork. He just laughs. A dismissive, cruel laugh that says everything without words. "Go home, kid." The Navy turns him away. The Army paratroopers tell him to come back when he's grown up. By every measurable standard, this boy is useless for war. He's the defective part that gets thrown in the scrap bin, the weapon that won't fire, the plane that can't fly. But here's what those recruiters didn't see. They didn't see the hands that had been feeding a family of 12 for the past 5 years. They didn't see the eyes of a hunter who understood that every missed shot meant his siblings went to bed hungry. They didn't see the cold arithmetic of survival that poverty had burned into this boy's soul. This wasn't just some farm kid playing soldier. This was a weapon that desperation had forged in the cotton fields of Texas, a weapon those recruiters were too blind to recognize. His name was Audie Murphy. And in less than 3 years, this boy, this reject, this joke, would climb onto a burning tank that was seconds away from exploding and become a one-man killing machine that would haunt German nightmares for generations. But the real story, the one that's been buried under medals and Hollywood movies, isn't just about what happened on that frozen battlefield in France. It's about what came after. It's about the war that never ended, the enemy that couldn't be killed with bullets. Because here's the truth they do not tell you about heroes: sometimes surviving is harder than dying. The story begins in a place where heroes aren't supposed to come from, Hunt County, Texas. The kind of poverty that doesn't just take your money, it takes your choices, your future, your dignity. Audie Murphy was the 6th of 12 children born to sharecroppers so poor that dirt poor would have been a compliment. His father, Emmett Murphy, was a man broken by poverty and pride. When the weight of feeding 12 mouths became too heavy, he did what broken men do. He disappeared. Just walked away one day and never came back. Audie's mother, Josie Bell Murphy, tried to hold the family together with nothing but willpower and prayer. She worked herself to exhaustion in those cotton fields, her hands bleeding, her back bent. But cotton prices don't care about a mother's love. The Depression don't care about your willpower. In 1941, when Audie was just 16 years old, his mother caught pneumonia. In a house with no money for doctors, no money for medicine, pneumonia is a death sentence. Josie Bell Murphy died in that house, surrounded by children she couldn't protect anymore. And suddenly this 110-pound boy with the baby face was the head of the family, the provider, the only thing standing between his younger siblings and starvation. His tool? A beat-up .22 rifle that had been in the family for years. His motivation? The hollow eyes of hungry children who depended on him. A neighbor, years later, would remember the Murphy boys shooting. That kid could drop a running rabbit at 50 yards with that little .22. Most grown men couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with that gun, but Audie, he never missed. It was uncanny, like he could see the future. But there was nothing mystical about it. Audie himself explained it in words colder than any winter morning. "If I don't hit what I shoot at, my family doesn't eat tonight." Think about that pressure. Every bullet costs money you don't have. Every miss means someone goes hungry. You don't get practice shots. You don't get to waste ammunition. You get one chance, and if you fail, people you love suffer. Under that kind of pressure, something happens to a person. You don't just learn to shoot, you learn to kill, efficiently, coldly, without hesitation or emotion. Audie Murphy developed what hunters call the eye. That split-second calculation of wind, distance, movement, trajectory, the ability to see a living creature and instantly reduce it to a problem with a solution. It wasn't sport, it wasn't hobby, it was mathematics with deadly consequences. He'd wake up before dawn, take that .22, and disappear into the woods. Sometimes he'd come back with rabbits, sometimes squirrels, occasionally a wild turkey if he got lucky. Whatever he brought back, his mother would cook. That was dinner. That was survival. His younger siblings remembered him differently than the rest of the world would. They didn't see a hero. They saw a brother who was always tired, always serious, always carrying weight that would have crushed most grown men. They saw someone who had stopped being a child the day their father left. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7th, 1941, Audie Murphy saw something the rest of America saw: an enemy to fight, a war to win, a chance for glory. But that's not what Audie saw. He saw steady pay. He saw 3 meals a day, guaranteed. He saw money he could send home to keep his siblings fed and housed. The war wasn't about patriotism for Audie Murphy. It was about survival. It was just a different kind of hunting. There was only one problem. He was still 16, still underweight, still looked like somebody's kid brother playing dress-up. He walked into that Marine recruiting office with hope and got humiliation. The Navy took one look at him and said no. The paratroopers laughed. Every single branch of the military saw the same thing: a boy too small, too young, too weak to be of any use. But Audie Murphy had been rejected his whole life. Rejected by a father who abandoned him. Rejected by a world that let his mother die. Rejected by poverty that told him he'd never amount to anything. One more rejection didn't break him. Finally, he found a recruiter in the regular Army infantry who was either desperate for bodies or had seen something in those cold blue eyes. Audie's older sister had forged an affidavit claiming he was 18. The recruiter looked at the obviously fake document. He looked at the boy who looked 14. He sighed, stamped the papers, and welcomed Private Audie Murphy to the United States Army. They thought they were getting another warm body to throw at the Germans. What they actually got was a weapon that had been forged in the fires of poverty, sharpened by desperation and loaded with a hunter's cold precision. They had just recruited a boy who understood something most soldiers never learn. Killing isn't personal. It's just arithmetic. Basic training was almost insulting for Murphy. The drill sergeants rode him mercilessly. They called him baby, kid, short stack. They made jokes about him needing a booster seat to see over the rifle. Private First Class David Mauser, who bunked near Murphy during training, remembered those early days with a kind of amused horror. We all thought he was some kind of mistake, you know. Like the army had accidentally accepted somebody's little brother. The sergeants gave him hell. But Murphy never complained, never said a word, just did whatever they told him with this blank expression. The first time Audie Murphy picked up an M1 Garand, something changed. The drill sergeant stopped laughing. The jokes died in people's throats. Mauser described it like witnessing a transformation. Those baby blue eyes just went dead. And then he started shooting. Bullseye, bullseye, bullseye. Every single shot, from every position, every distance. I watched him put 30 rounds through the same hole at 100 yards. The drill sergeant stopped calling him baby after that. They started calling him sharpshooter, then just Murphy. The tone changed from mockery to something like respect, maybe even fear, because everyone who watched Audie Murphy shoot understood the same thing. This wasn't talent. This was something colder. This was a boy who had learned to kill out of necessity and had perfected it into an art form. In July 1943, Company B of the 15th Infantry Regiment boarded ships headed for Sicily, Operation Husky, the invasion of Italy. Most of the men were terrified, excited, nervous, all the normal emotions of soldiers going into their first combat. Audie Murphy felt nothing. He'd been hunting for survival since he was 11 years old. The only difference was the prey had changed. Sicily was where the mask came off, where the army finally understood what they had. The fighting in Sicily was brutal. Mountains, heat, experienced German defenders who knew the terrain. Company B took casualties immediately. Men who had been laughing and joking on the ship were suddenly dead in ditches, blown apart by artillery, cut down by machine gun fire. Murphy moved through it like he was back in the woods of Hunt County. He used terrain. He moved silently. He shot with that same cold efficiency that had kept his family from starving. Near Palermo, Company B got pinned down by a German machine gun nest on a hillside. The doctrine said, wait for support, call in artillery, don't risk unnecessary casualties. Murphy's doctrine said something different. While everyone else took cover, Murphy studied the terrain. He spotted a gully that ran parallel to the German position. Without asking permission, without telling anyone his plan, he just moved. Low and fast, using every bit of cover, working his way around the German flank. The Germans never saw him coming. Murphy got within grenade range and eliminated the entire crew, but he didn't stop there. In a move that would become his signature, he turned the German MG-42 around and used it to rake the retreating forces. Captain Paul Harris wrote up the action for a Bronze Star. His report included a line that was both observation and prophecy. This soldier displays a natural aptitude for combat that is extraordinary. Extraordinary didn't begin to cover it. What Captain Harris had witnessed was a boy who had discovered his purpose. Audie Murphy was good at exactly one thing: killing. And in war, that made him invaluable. Sicily was just the beginning. The Italian campaign was a meat grinder. Salerno, the Volturno River, Anzio, each battle more brutal than the last. The Germans weren't just defending. They were dug in, experienced and fighting for every inch of ground. This was where Audie Murphy stopped being a good soldier and became something else entirely, something the Germans would learn to fear. At the Volturno River in October 1943, Murphy's squad got caught in a German counterattack. The squad leader was killed in the first volley. The assistant squad leader panicked and froze. Half the men were wounded or dead within the first 30 seconds. Murphy didn't freeze. He grabbed a captured German sniper rifle, a Mauser K98 with a scope, and found a position with good sightlines. For the next 40 minutes, he held that position alone. 5 German soldiers, dead. All at ranges exceeding 300 yards, clean headshots that dropped them before they even knew they were being targeted. The counterattack broke. The Germans retreated. When the smoke cleared, the army counted bodies and realized that one 19-year-old kid with a borrowed rifle had just saved an entire platoon. They awarded him the Distinguished Service Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor. Staff Sergeant William Polson, who fought alongside Murphy through Italy, tried to explain what made him different. Most soldiers, they fight angry, right? They fight scared. They fight emotional. Murph didn't fight like that. He fought cold, calculated, like he was doing math homework. See a German, eliminate the German, next problem. No emotion, no hesitation, no second thoughts. It was the most terrifying thing I ever witnessed, and he was on our side. The place where 36,000 Allied soldiers got pinned down by German artillery for 4 months of absolute hell. The problem at Anzio was German armor, tanks that could destroy infantry positions from a distance. Murphy's squad encountered a Panzer IV that was methodically destroying their position, killing men with each shot. The doctrine said, take cover, call for air support, wait for your own armor. Murphy's doctrine said something different. He grabbed a bazooka, a weapon he'd never fired in combat, and did something insane. He crawled toward the tank, not away from it, toward it, using every bit of cover, every shell crater, every piece of debris. At point-blank range, where missing was impossible, he fired. He was awarded his first Silver Star. The citation used words like extraordinary courage and complete disregard for personal safety. What it should have said was, this soldier has fundamentally misunderstood the concept of self-preservation. By the time Company B fought through Rome and into southern France, Audie Murphy had a reputation. New replacements would hear stories about him before they even met him. But reputation has consequences. The Germans started learning his name too. Company B was advancing through a small village near Montélimar when everything went wrong. A German ambush. Well planned, perfectly executed. The platoon leader, Lieutenant Manning, was killed in the first burst of fire. Suddenly there was no chain of command. Sergeant Murphy didn't wait for someone to take charge. He became the charge. 18 Americans against over 100 German infantry. The situation wasn't desperate, it was mathematically impossible. They should have been wiped out in minutes. For 2 hours, Murphy held a critical crossroads. He directed fire. He moved between positions. He personally accounted for 15 confirmed kills. But more than that, he made decisions. Tactical decisions that saved lives. When the smoke cleared and reinforcements arrived, they found 18 Americans still alive, still holding the position, and one sergeant covered in blood, none of it his own, calmly giving orders. The army finally understood what they had. On October 14, 1944, They gave the kid, who was too small to be a Marine, a battlefield commission. Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy. He'd killed more enemy soldiers than some entire platoons. Every single one of his original friends from training was either dead or medically evacuated. The boy from Hunt County was still alive, but increasingly alone. Every familiar face was gone, replaced by new soldiers who looked at him with a mixture of awe and fear, because by now everyone understood the truth. Audie Murphy wasn't just good at combat, he was built for it. Poverty had removed his fear of death, hunting had taught him patience and precision, and war had given him purpose. He'd finally found something he was good at, and that realization was starting to haunt him. The last piece of French soil the German Wehrmacht controlled, veterans of brutal winter warfare in Norway. These weren't conscripts or teenagers forced into uniforms. These were professional soldiers who knew how to kill. Company B was dying. Every officer except Murphy was dead or evacuated. They were down to 40 effective fighters. Murphy himself was wounded, shrapnel in his leg from an artillery burst. He told no one. Private Anthony Abramsky described their condition in words that still carry weight. "We were finished. Most of us hadn't slept in 3 days. We tried to dig foxholes. The ground was frozen solid, like trying to dig through iron." January 26, 1945. Company B was strung out in a thin defensive line at the forest edge. Behind them, the forest. No fallback position, no reserves. Murphy had positioned their only anti-tank capability, 2 M10 tank destroyers. He had his 40 men, and he had one field telephone line running back to artillery support. Tree bursts, shells exploding in the canopy, showering the frozen ground with razor-sharp shrapnel and burning splinters. It lasted 30 minutes. Psychological warfare meant to break men before the real attack began. His voice, even years later in interviews, still carried the terror of that moment. And behind them, Jesus Christ, maybe 250 infantry, all in white winter camouflage, moving across that field like ghosts, like death itself was coming for us. The Germans were too spread out, moving too fast, too many of them. They missed. The crews were exhausted, fingers numb with cold, eyes blurred from lack of sleep. Their first shots went wide. The return fire was immediate and devastating. An 80mm shell from a German tank struck the rear M10 directly in the turret. It exploded into flames. The forward M10, trying to reposition, slid sideways into a drainage ditch. Its track spun uselessly on the frozen ground. The crew abandoned it and retreated to the tree line. The German infantry was now within 200 yards and closing fast, the moment when positions collapse and men die. He ordered his remaining 40 men to fall back to prepared positions deeper in the woods. Instead, as his men ran for cover, Lieutenant Audie Murphy ran forward, toward the burning M10, toward the German tanks, toward certain death. Private Abramsky watched it happen. I thought he'd lost his mind. You could hear ammunition cooking off inside, these sharp little pops that meant the whole thing was about to blow sky high. And Murphy just ran toward it like he was running to catch a bus. Murphy climbed onto the back deck of the burning tank destroyer and manned its .50 caliber machine gun. A single silhouette standing on top of what was essentially a bomb, completely exposed to 250 rifles, 6 tanks, and multiple machine guns. The Germans couldn't believe what they were seeing. Each round is half an inch in diameter, traveling at 2,900 feet per second with enough energy to tear a human body in half. In the hands of a normal soldier, it's a weapon of suppression. You fire in the general direction of the enemy and hope the sheer volume of fire keeps their heads down. In Audie Murphy's hands, it became a precision instrument of death. Every burst hit something. Sergeant Elmer Brealey, watching from the woodline, tried to describe it later. The German infantry got within 10 yards of Lieutenant Murphy. 10 yards. Close enough to see their faces, and he just kept cutting them down. In the open field. But Murphy wasn't just firing the machine gun, like he was ordering lunch, not orchestrating his own death. The German infantry found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Their tanks couldn't advance without infantry support. Murphy was killing the infantry. Their infantry couldn't advance. Artillery was exploding around them, and a machine gun was cutting them to pieces. Technical Sergeant Morris Wald, watching from battalion headquarters through binoculars, gave testimony that still seems impossible. Murphy's fire was incredibly effective. He wasn't just shooting, every burst was aimed. I watched him cut down an entire squad trying to flank our position. They got within spitting distance, and he just eliminated them. One burst, gone. Next burst, gone. It was like watching a machine work. The Germans tried everything. They hit the M10 with tank rounds, kept calling artillery. The Germans sensed it. They surged forward. The Germans were now within 10 yards. This was the end. Lieutenant Walter Weisfennig, the forward observer, refused. "Sir, that will kill you." The first shells landed 50 yards out, but Murphy, standing on top of that burning tank destroyer, was also in the impact zone. The combination of his direct fire and the artillery exploding around him finally broke the German attack. It was 15-20 hours. After 1 hour of sustained combat, the attack was over. Audie Murphy, his uniform scorched, his leg bleeding, his face blackened with smoke, climbed down from the M10. 10 minutes later, the tank destroyer exploded in a fireball that could be seen for miles. Murphy walked calmly back to the tree line where his men waited in stunned silence. According to Private Abramsky, he was scary calm, like nothing had happened. He asked if we had any casualties, made sure everyone was okay, then sat down, lit a cigarette, and asked for a status report. His hands weren't even shaking. We were all shaking, but not Murphy, never Murphy. On that day, Audie Murphy killed or wounded an estimated 50 German soldiers. He alone had stopped a combined arms assault by 250 elite troops and 6 tanks. He had saved his company from annihilation, and he had secured his place in history. The aftermath of Holzwihr revealed something extraordinary, something that proves this wasn't just battlefield legend or American propaganda. The German silence. Historians have spent decades searching German military archives, veteran organizations, personal diaries, unit after-action reports, looking for the German account of what happened on January 26, 1945. They found almost nothing. A near-total absence of first-hand testimony from the men who attacked that position. This silence is perhaps the most powerful evidence of what Audie Murphy accomplished. The 2nd Mountain Division were professionals. They kept meticulous records. They documented every action, every casualty, every tactical lesson learned, except this one. The German war diary for that day contains one brief entry. Attack on American positions near Holzwihr repulsed with heavy casualties. Enemy resistance heavier than expected. Heavier than expected. That's all they wrote. Because how do you write the truth? How do you report that 250 of your best men, supported by 6 tanks, were not just defeated, but humiliated by one American standing on a burning vehicle? It was incomprehensible. It didn't fit their doctrine. It didn't fit their understanding of warfare. It didn't fit their sense of professional pride. They had encountered something that broke their logic. A soldier who was simply better at killing than they were at surviving. So they buried it. They erased it. They never spoke of it. That silence echoes louder than any after-action report ever could. June 2nd, 1945, near Salzburg, Austria. Lieutenant General Alexander Patch stood before 2nd Lieutenant Audie Murphy and formally presented him with the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. The citation reads, "He was alone and exposed to German fire from 3 sides, but his deadly fire killed dozens of Germans and caused their infantry attack to waver. For an hour, the Germans tried every available weapon to eliminate 2nd Lieutenant Murphy, but he continued to hold his position and wiped out a squad which was trying to creep up unnoticed on his right flank." It goes on, but the words feel inadequate. How do you capture that hour in a paragraph? How do you reduce that impossibility to bureaucratic language? Murphy's own words, as always, were more direct. When asked why he climbed onto that burning tank destroyer, his answer was simple. "They were killing my friends." Later, he would elaborate slightly. "It wasn't heroic. I figured if one man could do the job, why risk more lives?" This was Audie Murphy's truth. He didn't fight for glory or medals. He fought because someone had to, and he was good at it. His final military record remains unmatched by any American soldier in history. 33 decorations, including the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, 2 bronze stars with V device, 3 Purple Hearts, 5 decorations from France and Belgium, including the French Legion of Honor and the Croix de Guerre. The boy who was too small to be a Marine had become the most decorated American combat soldier of World War II. But medals don't tell the whole story. Numbers can't capture the cost. The war in Europe ended May 8, 1945. The guns fell silent across the continent. Millions of men came home to parades, celebrations, kissing their sweethearts in Times Square, starting families, building the American dream. Audie Murphy came home to a nightmare he couldn't escape. He was a national hero. Life magazine put him on the cover. That baby face, those cold blue eyes, wearing more medals than seemed possible on one chest. He was invited to Hollywood. James Cagney saw his photo and helped launch his acting career. To the public, this was the perfect ending. The ultimate rags to riches story. Poor Texas farm boy defeats the Nazis, becomes rich and famous. Roll credits. But that's not where the story ends. That's where the real war begins. The war Audie Murphy couldn't win with a rifle. The man who had shown no fear on top of a burning tank was now terrified of the dark. He couldn't sleep in a bed. He moved to his garage, sleeping with the lights on because darkness meant night patrols, meant ambush, meant death. He suffered from what the army then called battle fatigue. We now know it as severe post-traumatic stress disorder. The nightmares were relentless. Every night he was back in Italy, back at Anzio, back on that burning M10 with 250 Germans trying to kill him. He was haunted, but not by the men he killed. Murphy felt no guilt about combat. He was haunted by the men he couldn't save. The faces of his friends, Brandon, Tipton, Manning, all the boys from Company B who died while he survived. "I can't remember when I didn't have nightmares," Murphy wrote years later. "They became part of my life, like breathing. Some demon seemed to have entered my body." He slept with a loaded .45 pistol under his pillow. His first wife, actress Wanda Hendricks, described living with him as living with 2 different people. During the day, he could be charming, funny, generous. At night, he became someone else entirely. Hendricks later testified, he'd wake up screaming, thinking he was back in combat. He'd patrol the house with a loaded gun, clearing rooms like they were enemy positions. I was terrified of him, not because he'd hurt me intentionally, but because in those moments he wasn't there. He was back in the war. Their marriage lasted 16 months. The war had ended for America, but it never ended for Audie Murphy. He was still fighting, still on that battlefield, every single night for the rest of his life. Despite his own demons, or perhaps because of them, Murphy became one of the first major public advocates for veterans' mental health. In the 1960s, when admitting to psychological trauma was seen as weakness, when battle fatigue was whispered about in shame, America's greatest hero stood up and said, "I have it." This was courage of a different kind, harder in some ways than anything he'd done in combat. He wrote for the Saturday Evening Post about his nightmares, his insomnia, his struggles. He testified before Congress about the need for better mental health care for veterans. He spoke publicly about something that terrified him more than German tanks ever had: vulnerability. "What about the veteran who can't sleep?" he asked in one article. "What about the thousands coming back from Vietnam with the same problems I have? Where's their help? Where's their support?" He was fighting again, but this time he wasn't fighting for Company B. He was fighting for every veteran who came home to find the war had followed them. In 1951, Murphy married Pamela Archer, a 31-year-old former airline stewardess. And here, finally, is where the story finds something like hope. Pamela saw both men inside Audie Murphy, the hero and the haunted, and she didn't run. For 20 years, she became his anchor. She weathered the nightmares, the midnight patrols, the loaded guns. She helped him raise 2 sons. She stood by him when Hollywood roles dried up, when money got tight, when the demons got louder. She was the field modification for a man still at war with himself. Pamela later said, "Audie carried invisible wounds that never healed. He'd wake up screaming, reliving battles from 20 years earlier. But he never stopped trying to help other veterans. The war never ended for Audie, but he turned his pain into purpose. For 2 decades, they fought that war together. Then, on May 28, 1971, the impossible happened. Audie Murphy, the man who had survived Sicily, Anzio, Holtzwihr, who had walked away from that exploding tank destroyer, died at age 45 in a private plane crash in the mountains of Virginia during a storm. The hero who had defied death 100 times in combat was killed by bad weather. America mourned. But for Pamela Murphy, the mission wasn't over. Audie had spent his life fighting for his friends. Now she would spend the rest of hers fighting for his. After Audie's death, the world discovered something that seemed impossible. The most decorated American soldier in history, the man who'd become a Hollywood star, died in debt. Bad investments. Mismanagement by people he trusted. By the time the plane went down, his estate was worth almost nothing. Pamela Murphy was 50 years old, a widow with 2 teenage sons, and a mountain of debt. This was her impossible situation, her Colmar pocket. The world expected her to fade away, to become a tragic footnote in a hero's story. Maybe write a tell-all book, maybe sell his medals to collectors. But they didn't understand who Pamela Murphy was. She was the woman who had stood beside Audie Murphy for 20 years, who had faced his demons with him, who had never retreated. She didn't write a book. She didn't sell the medals. Instead, Pamela Murphy walked into the Sepulveda Veterans Affairs Hospital in Los Angeles and asked for a job. Not a high-level position, not a desk job with her famous name on the door. She took a position as a patient liaison, a clerk, someone who helped veterans navigate the bureaucracy. For the next 35 years, Pamela Murphy worked at that VA hospital. She arrived every morning, took her small desk and became a one-woman army for veterans nobody else would listen to. She saw them, the Vietnam veterans suffering from the same PTSD that had haunted her husband, the forgotten soldiers lost in paperwork, their benefits denied, their appointments cancelled, their files misplaced. She became their advocate. When a doctor wouldn't see a veteran, she made calls. When a benefit check disappeared, she found it. When a bureaucrat said no, Pamela Murphy walked into their office and didn't leave until no became yes. She treated every veteran, from homeless soldiers in the hallway to decorated colonels, with the same respect and determination. She saw her husband's face in every one of them, his pain, his struggle, his unfinished mission. Pamela Murphy worked at that VA hospital until she was 87 years old. She finally retired in 2007 after 35 years of service. She never remarried. When she died in 2010, she was buried next to Audie at Arlington National Cemetery. The mechanic reunited with her pilot, the mission complete. So how did he do it? How did one 110-pound 19-year-old boy actually survive that hour on the burning tank destroyer? The answer isn't magic. It's not Hollywood heroics. It's a perfect alignment of factors that military historians still study today. First, the weapon. The M2 Browning 50 caliber machine gun designed by John Browning in 1921 was arguably the finest heavy machine gun of World War II. Each 50 BMG cartridge could penetrate an inch of armor plate. The gun was reliable even in freezing conditions. It didn't jam. In normal hands, it was a weapon of suppression. In Murphy's hands, it was a precision instrument. He wasn't spraying bullets. He was aiming every burst, one target. The cold arithmetic of hunting rabbits applied to hunting men. Second, the position. That burning M10 tank destroyer looked like a death trap. It was a death trap. But Murphy understood something the Germans didn't. The German 80mm shell had struck the diesel fuel tanks, not the ammunition storage. The vehicle was burning, but slowly. More importantly, the thick black smoke provided a perfect screen. The Germans knew where the fire was coming from, but they couldn't get a clear shot at the man inside the smoke. Murphy was fighting from inside a burning fortress, and he knew exactly how much time he had before it exploded. Third, the force multiplier. Murphy wasn't just a one-man army. He was a one-man fire direction center. While firing the 50 cal with one hand, he was holding that field telephone with the other, calling in 105mm artillery strikes from batteries miles away. The Germans weren't just facing his machine gun. They were facing the sky exploding around them, directed by the man in the smoke. Fourth, the hunter. Military scientists have calculated the odds. Given 250 infantry with rifles, 6 tanks, multiple machine guns, mortars, they estimate over 10,000 rounds were fired at Murphy's position during that hour. Statistical models suggest he should have been hit 15 to 20 times. He was hit once by shrapnel from an indirect hit. This wasn't just luck. This was the skill of a Texas rabbit hunter who understood not being seen, who understood using terrain and smoke and the chaos of battle to his advantage. Dr. Dave Grossman, an expert on combat psychology, offered this analysis. Murphy represented a perfect storm of factors. He had technical skills from hunting, motivation from poverty, emotional detachment from early trauma, and most importantly, a protective instinct for his men that overrode every survival instinct. He wasn't fighting for America or glory, he was fighting for his friends. That changes everything. The legacy of Audie Murphy is twofold, and both parts matter equally. First, he broke the stigma of PTSD. Because America's greatest hero admitted he suffered from it, thousands of other veterans felt they could ask for help. He gave them permission to be human, to be broken, to need support. Before Murphy spoke out, battle fatigue was shameful. After Murphy spoke out, it became survivable. Second, Pamela Murphy's 35-year mission. She worked at that VA hospital until she was 87 years old. She helped thousands of veterans navigate the system, get their benefits, receive their care. When she died in 2010, veterans from 3 wars attended her funeral. Men she'd helped, whose lives she'd saved without ever firing a shot. The Audie L. Murphy Memorial VA Hospital in San Antonio, Texas, was named in his honor in 1973. But Pamela was his living memorial, a 35-year testament to the promise of leave no one behind. The world saw a hero, Pamela saw a man. The recruiters saw a fatal flaw. The army found a weapon, the Germans saw an impossible enemy, Murphy saw a problem that needed solving. It all comes back to one truth that makes this story extraordinary. The 110-pound farm boy, who was too small to be a soldier, became the man who stopped an army to save his friends. And in doing so, through his combat, through his advocacy, through the wife who loved him, he saved thousands more long after the guns fell silent. That's not just a war story. That's proof that sometimes the greatest weapons come in the smallest packages, that sometimes the rejected become the irreplaceable, that sometimes one person, standing in the right place at the right time with the right motivation, can change everything. Audie Murphy wasn't supposed to be a hero. He was too small, too young, too poor, too broken. But he became one anyway. Not because he was fearless, he was terrified his entire life. Not because he was invincible, he carried wounds that never healed. But because when it mattered most, when his friends needed him, he climbed onto that burning tank and refused to retreat. That's the story they don't tell you about heroes. Sometimes surviving is the hardest part. Sometimes the real war is the one that comes after. And sometimes the greatest victory is not what you do in battle. It's what you do when the battle's over and you're still standing, still fighting, still trying to save one more person. Audie Murphy fought 2 wars. He won them both.